Good morning, everyone, and welcome to today's panel discussion, A Season of Support, Grief Resources for Veterans and Their Families. My name is Stephanie Novak. I'm a limited licensed master social worker, and I've been here at CNS Healthcare for almost 6 years. I am currently a case management team supervisor. I'm the wife of a disabled veteran who is receiving services through the VA system, and I'm also the co-chair for our veteran committee, along with Laverne Santangelo. And working with veterans and their families is truly my passion. Here at CNS Healthcare, we're a certified community behavioral health center, and we are able to work with veterans regardless of their insurance or disability status. We also offer children's services, which is something that the VA unfortunately does not offer. I will be leading our discussion today. We are so glad to have you here to engage in an important conversation about the unique challenges that veterans and their families face when dealing with grief, loss, and mental health challenges. As we know, veterans often carry invisible wounds that can deeply affect their emotional well-being, particularly after experiencing loss or facing mental health crises. The journey through grief is never linear, and each person's path is different, but the one thing that remains constant is the need for support, connection, and resources. Today, we are fortunate to have an incredible group of panelists who bring a wealth of experience and insight into how we can better understand and support veterans and their families during difficult times. From professional counselors and peer support specialists to authors and loved ones who have experienced the loss of a veteran, this diverse panel will provide a holistic view of the grief process and resources available for healing and resilience. Thank you to each of you for being here, for sharing your experiences, and for contributing to this critical conversation. We hope this discussion will not only raise awareness, but also empower all of us to take an action in supporting those who have given so much in service to our country. Now let me introduce our panelists. Tina Sawicki is a clinical social worker she works as the Compact Act Program Coordinator with the Detroit VA, where she works to ensure that veterans and their families have access to resources they need through the VA's comprehensive healthcare system. Tina's passion for supporting veterans and her extensive knowledge of the programs available will be a key resource in our discussion today. Isaac Cortez is a peer support specialist with Oakland Community Health Network. As a veteran himself and as a peer, Isaac brings a unique perspective, offering support and guidance to others who may be navigating their own mental health challenges. His personal experience, combined with his professional expertise, makes him a valuable voice in today's conversation. Chaka McDonald is a veteran navigator also with OCHN, specializing in guiding veterans and their families through the resources and services available to them. Chaka's work is critical in connecting veterans with the services and support they need, and his dedication to their well-being is testament to his commitment to this cause. Nat Cole Staskowitz is the author of Lacey's Moon, a children's book on grief that helps young readers process loss and understand their emotions in a compassionate way. Nat Cole's work in grief education for children reminds us the importance of addressing grief across all ages, especially for those who may not have the words to express their feelings. Joan Baldwin is the sister of a veteran who tragically completed suicide. Joan's personal experience of grief, loss, and navigating the aftermath of suicide will provide invaluable insight into the emotional toll that such a loss can have on family members, as well as ongoing need for support. Laverne Santangelo is my co-chair on the Veteran Committee. She is retired after serving 23 years as a military police officer in the Army National Guard, a licensed professional counselor, and a grief specialist who has helped countless individuals process grief and healing. Laverne's expertise in grief counseling will help deepen our understanding of how to navigate loss in a healthy way. Thank you to all our panelists for joining us today. We look forward to hearing your perspectives and learning from your expertise. Let's begin. Tina, good morning.
Good morning.
Can you tell us a little bit about what you do at the VA, what the VA is doing to address veteran suicide?
Yep, definitely, and I'm really glad to be here today. So I have been at the VA for 15 years, working in suicide prevention since 2016 specifically. So as far as our suicide prevention efforts, the VA offers a large array of services. Supporting veterans is a mission that we all share, and trying to prevent suicide is our #1 priority. With that, there are opportunities, though, for collective action. So VA alone cannot end veterans' suicide. That's where we need our partners. We need the community to come together with us. So as we're looking ahead, and based on our national strategy for veteran suicide prevention, the VA is going to be looking to, we're remaining committed to and looking to bolster our 7 priority areas to help prevent veteran suicide. Those areas include promoting firearms storage or safe firearms storage in the community, building and sustaining community collaboration. We're out in the community. We're doing a lot of community work, far more than what we were doing when I started at the VA many years ago. So again, really bringing together our partners. We're also expanding our crisis intervention services, and I'll talk a little bit about that in a little bit as far as what the Compact Act is as that program coordinator. We're tailoring prevention and intervention services to our veterans, so again, continuing to strive to improve in that area. We're also advancing suicide prevention into those non-clinical areas. So really looking that for our non-mental health providers, they have what they need, and that we're assessing veterans for suicide. We're enhancing mental health care access across a full continuum of care. And finally, we're looking to integrate suicide prevention within, like I said, I already mentioned, in those medical settings. So again, ensuring our non-mental health providers have the support and services that they need to help identify a veteran who might be at risk for suicide.
That's a lot. You guys got a lot going on.
Thanks, Tina. That's good.
A lot.
Yeah.
Laverne, can you maybe speak to some of the common emotional challenges that veterans face?
So I'm just thinking, kind of processing and, what Joan, she shared and the different family members and underneath, I'm hearing how everyone is kind of processing the loss, the grief and everything that goes along with, the loss of your brother. And one of the things, and I would speak to for myself and for just a blanket statement though, that I want to make, grief is different for everyone.
Yeah.
Anyway, right? Grief is just different. We all grieve differently. There's no right or wrong way. But when you're as we talk about veterans, one of the things I think we have to kind of remember that kind of goes along with veterans, there is a lot of layers. There is compounded losses that sometimes veterans experience, when they are, as they're dealing with grief. There is death of comrades. If they're leaving the military, there's loss of military lifestyle. That's grief. All of that is in there. Loss of routine, because the military is very regimented. It's rigid. There's a schedule. You do it this way. You do it that way. You leave, and all of that changes, right? Mm-hmm. What do? There's grief in that. Some veterans even might be dealing with survivor's guilt. As you talked about your brother serving, I think you said he didn't serve in combat.
He didn't serve in
combat. But there's still a loss.
But he was an MP.
Mm-hmm,
and in alignment with what you're expressing is that he chose as a profession and also got preferential hiring to be law enforcement. It was just a good fit for him. And
there's survivor's guilt that comes along with that. If there's an event that happens as law enforcement, you make it out of it, you lose friends. Mm-hmm. If you're on the battlefield, I've served with people who lost their entire unit. And that was something, you mentioned Vietnam at the very beginning, Chaka, which we haven't gotten to, but how do you deal with that? How do you, on an ongoing, everyday basis, that compounds the grief? Okay, and then let's add a layer of family Family, your family is also grieving. They're grieving along with you. But then what about the separations that family deals with when you go off and you're deployed or when a soldier deploys? And so there's a lot of layers that veterans might be dealing with, living with, that a civilian is not. So that kind of makes it, maybe complicates the grief a little bit more, or certain things that happen, the trauma from other events exacerbates the grief, or even trying to just maybe separate it off.
Or just not even having
Peers.
peers that you can speak to.
Yes. Yeah. Identity struggles. Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Isaac, as a veteran yourself, and like, Laverne talked a little bit about, her friends comrades that she served with. I'm sure you yourself have your own stories and probably have experienced some kind of personal grief. How do you cope with that when you go through those types of situations?
Grief is something that, it will cross paths with every human that walks this planet. It's a human emotion that is a very natural emotion. And in the military, we see all the bravado and we see Hollywood and we hear podcasts and we read books, and there's this grandiose image of, these knights in shining armor kind of mentality. And, it's a lot of what the military is. There's some of that, but the reality is it's a profession that any man or woman who volunteers for that profession has to knowingly accept that they're in the profession of combat and serving combat or supporting combat, and that the potential for life and death situations is going to present itself eventually. Whether it's through training, whether it's through active, real, full-fledged combat, through suicide, there's a lot of things that occur within the military that are life and death related. And I come from the Marine Corps, and my peers all know me. They, some have fathers who were Marines. If you know Marines, we're kind of the misfits of the armed service. We have a very dark, twisted kind of relationship and humor about life and death. And to us, it's natural. It's one of the ways that we kind of build a coping mechanism and a defense mechanism.
Sure.
Is to kind of, it's hard to say it without snickering and smiling, but it's kind of twisted because you have to kind of really come to grips with it and have a unique, twisted relationship with life and death. I've faced death a lot of times. I'm still here, thankfully. But I think part of the candor and the humor that I've allowed myself to have related to it has enabled me to get through some of the darker periods of time that I've faced it. Specifically with colleagues, service members that I've served with and lost either to, real combat operations or suicide. The coping that occurs for me is there's a lot of survivor's guilt, and it's like whenever you experience a death, you're going through your head and you're like, we went through all this, and we went through boot camp, and we went through OCS, and we went through all these training evolutions, and we deployed 5 times. I have 4 combat tours, and every time I come home, I'm just, there's a moment where you kind of look in the mirror and you do one of these, and you look at your fingers and your toes, at least I do, and I'm like, I still got them. And it blows my mind that I have them still, because I've had close calls. And I think about scenarios or situations that I've lost people in, that it could have very easily been me. Just a second, a nanosecond of a difference, it could have been me instead of that person. And I think the coping really comes with allowing yourself to come to peace with, I'm in a profession that is very real, and your number is going to get called, whether or not you're religious or not, spiritual or not. In the grand scheme of the universe, there's a certain series of events that occurs, and you just have to come to grips with where you are in the universe and how it's going to impact and when it's going to impact. And when it does, to cope, understand human nature and just understand that grief is okay, crying is okay, being emotional is okay, being angry is okay. I'm a hothead dude, and a lot of people say, you got some anger issues, dude. And but I work on them. And I think part of the way that I cope is I use resources. I go to therapy. I meditate. I do the things that you're supposed to do, because when you're hit with anything in life that's difficult, it throws you off balance, whatever your normal routine is. And I tell everyone, get back on the horse and do what your normal routine is. And for me, and that's different for everyone. For me, Chaka knows this. I get up at 4:30 every morning. I exercise right away. And that's part of my routine. And that keeps me focused. It keeps me driven. It keeps me balanced. And at least there's the control that I have to make certain choices in my life is how I cope. You have the choice to cope in a bad way, and you have the choice to use resources that you have available to you to cope in a good way. It's not easy. There's a lot of times where you might need a mentor to kind of pull you along, and that's one of the great things about the military is I have tough love everywhere I go. I am very fortunate to have served with some friends that I still call very close friends, and I know that I can lean on them. And being able to, having that peace of mind that if anything goes wrong, all I got to do is pick up the phone and just call. And at least, it might be just a 10-minute call that I have with somebody that gets me back on track. I had a rough day, and I just talked to Chuck in the parking lot about something that's going on in my personal life, and it's driving me bonkers. But you vent, and you use the people and the support cast that you have in your life, because even if you think that you don't have people in your life, you do. There's resources available, complete strangers that I know who are veterans. I run a peer support group, and I always advocate for veterans that I work with, come to the support group, vent. Talk to me about what's going on in your life. And an hour and a half spent with me in the room right over there,
Right.
with our partner agency at CNS. I've met veterans that were in some dark spots, and I'm not taking credit for this by any means. It's just, it was a resource that's available to them.
Peer support is is huge.
That I've advocated for them to lean on. And when they talk and they get it out, sometimes all it is just sharing it and getting it out. You don't have a solution necessarily at the end of the meeting, but just vocalizing it and getting it out of your body is a release. And I always say sleep on it. If you're having a rough day, the good thing about the day is that the sun rises and it sets, and at the end of the day when it sets, you can go to bed and you can wake up fresh and start fresh again in the morning and figure it out. Don't quit. Never, ever, ever quit. Just, keep advancing and focus on one more step. What's the next thing that I have to do? That's how I cope.
Sounds like you have a lot of help in your not just help, but like you have a lot of people in your support circle.
I do.
And
A lot of
it
green
sounds intentional.
is
Like
necessary.
you intentionally made it so that you have a good support and you have a good circle.
It's a perfect word for it, because intent and intention, and I use this lesson with my daughters who are very young. I say, no, that's not how it happened. You made a decision to do something. It didn't just happen miraculously. You do something, after you make a decision to do something. Intentionally surrounding yourself with people is a decision. Sitting in your basement alone, feeling sorry for yourself, is a decision. And I don't say that to be mean or cruel, you know, but like I know people who do that. And I tell them, I said, you're never gonna figure it out, and you're never gonna get to a solution point if you just sit around and feel sorry for yourself. The hard part is recognizing that, coming to grips with that, recognizing that you need help, and being willing to get the help. And then take that first step, and then support groups. Call a buddy, call a friend, call your mom, call your dad, who, if you have
What
loved
about the
ones.
stigma around needing help? I think that is the biggest obstacle in law enforcement and with military.
Yeah.
The perception of being weak, and that therefore you're alone in that moment that I described of despair. Because
Sure.
that's the moment that's literally life-saving to just connect with someone who isn't gonna.
Yes.
So that I think is a huge obstacle for most of us. The idea that we have to step out.
And veterans especially.
Yeah.
Veterans
Well,
in,
yeah.
in the military and in the veteran communities,
Yeah.
there is
Police
such a
officers,
stigma on
being
leaning
weak.
in and leaning on.
I really appreciate you saying that, Joan, because, like, you know, and I don't want to over talk or go on to my time, but stigma is one of those questions or one of those words that
It's fatal.
it's
Yeah,
fatal.
yeah.
But the way that I view it is there is a stigma.
Yeah.
And anyone who knows me, my closest friends and family will tell you, Isaac is a guy who is the most stubborn, like thick-headed, like will not accept help under any circumstance. Like he's got to wrestle with it, and he's got to figure it out, and he's gonna figure it out on his own. He always does. And then over time, with the gray that's coming in, you realize that's why have I done it that way my whole life? You know, until something happens as you get older and wiser, and you start realizing I didn't have to do it the hard way all the time. And in the military, you know, I did 23 years in the Corps. I was enlisted and officer, and there's pieces of your military career where you have to do it alone. They teach you to be
Exactly.
they teach you to be independent, and they teach you not to rely on anyone else. But then there's a period of training where they merge all the things together and they show how joint it is, joint operations, like the Army and Marine Corps, the Navy and the Marine Corps, and the Air Force. You know, like there's all these services that don't technically get along sometimes, but when they work together, it's amazing what they accomplish when they put all their minds together and they work together as a team.
Well, other than stigma, needing help sometimes is a trigger.
Yeah.
That if
Right,
you feel
right.
like you need help, then you just go right to the amygdala and say, if I need help, then I'm in danger, I'm screwed. So the denial of needing help is actually, if you look at what it's doing, it's a survival mechanism because it's protecting you
Yep.
from that trauma moment
right.
where I will be annihilated, where you either shut down or you give up. It's so complicated.
And I'll be very brief on this point. Is some of the folks in here have heard me speak before, you know, and the analogy that I always provide is the military, especially the Marine Corps, is very good at training. And they take an operating system in a man or a woman, usually when they're much younger,
Right.
17, 18, 19 years old, and they gut it.
Yeah.
And then they put in a new operating system.
Right.
And this all happens before the prefrontal cortex is completely formed.
Right.
So you're not even fully developed yet.
Until 25.
And when that happens, it's like a Control-Alt-Delete reset. Boo, system shuts down, and then it powers up, and the robot is behaving completely differently.
Yeah, they have to do that.
And they have to do it
They have to.
because
They
they
have
have
to,
to remove
because
the
you got to-
individualism out of
Right.
somebody.
Right. Because you
They-
operate as a team.
They have to make
And-
them understand that they're operating as a team.
Well, that's
And-
exactly the moment
and
I'm describing,
surviving.
that the
Right.
trigger that you need help means that you're in danger and that robot comes up and you need to, I mean, that's when you get into the real, not real.
Yep.
And that is very challenging.
So what I always preach or advocate for is, and when I use that analogy, whenever you leave the armed services, whatever branch it is, I tell veterans all the time, I refer to that analogy and I remind them of how good the military is at rebooting them. But I say it's your job when you transition. I'm not saying gut the hardware and throw it out completely, because that's a huge piece of veterans' identity.
It's like, how? Don't
Is
do that.
like that's who I am. I'm a Marine until I die. You know, but you have to be able to expand the hard drive and allow that a new operating system to be in there as well. And you have multiple operating systems. And you have to teach your body and those neurotransmitters to refire and reconnect and rework so that your thinking is adaptive. And you get away from the mentality of, I need to do this by myself. And
So what resources are available that doesn't involve an appointment and a secretary?
988.
yeah,
I'm serious. 988, right? And
Yep.
then 988 connects you over to,
Press
you know,
for
some,
Veterans Crisis
if
Line.
there's that stigma,
Yeah.
you know,
Well-
behind that.
Well, I mean,
And
That's
Chaka
what it's
also,
doing.
what Chaka does with OCHN also does not involve a secretary and, I mean, maybe some appointments, but there's, you know, it's not quite, I feel like your services aren't quite as intimidating as
Right.
trying to get in touch with, you know, the VA system, because it can be very frustrating just to schedule an appointment with the VA.
Yeah,
So-
can I? Oh, go ahead. I
So
wanted
would
to
you-
add something
would-
to that.
Everybody
now.
just said
Mhm.
988, but just for the people who are watching, will you explain what 988 is?
I'm gonna let Tina
Yeah.
kind of talk a little
Yeah.
bit. Is that okay, Tina?
Yeah,
About that?
yeah,
And,
but
I,
it's-
and then I
yeah.
kind of want to add to that. Can you
Yeah.
get that? So,
So the National Suicide Prevention Lifeline is 988, or you still might see 1-800-273-8255. If you press 1 from either of those numbers, that will transfer you over to the Veterans Crisis Line. For those veterans who access the Veterans Crisis Line, those are VA trained responders, many of them veterans themselves. They're going to respond to what's going on in hand. It doesn't have to be a crisis. One can call because, you know what, it's 3 a.m. and maybe you're struggling with some thoughts from your service, right? And you don't have anyone around you and you just want to talk. Call the Veterans Crisis Line. Or for those non-veterans, call the National Suicide Prevention Lifeline. For our veterans, if it's a crisis situation, those trained responders, they'll reach out to local law enforcement to get that welfare check, to see if that veteran, to get that assessment if that individual needs to be transported to a local facility, to a local hospital.
So
For-
what if
yeah.
what if it's a family member of a veteran? So say, you know, I'm not a social worker, I don't know what I'm doing, I have, you know, and I call that 988 number because my husband's in crisis.
Mhm.
Can I still use that 988, push 1 and get in touch with a veteran specific?
Yep, you do not have to be a veteran to call it. You can have concern for a veteran loved one, and you can call 988 as that 988 press 1 as that third party caller, and then the Veterans Crisis Line, they'll reach out to that veteran and do a further assessment. If you don't want them reaching out to that veteran, you know what they can still do if you're like, he just needs some resources and he won't listen to me, right? You know, because I'm the wife, and just, you know, because you're not always going to hear things the same when you're dealing with a family member or loved one as you might hear it from that third party, like non-involved individual, the person who's not sitting down at the table having with you, right? And what will happen with those calls is that a referral may or may not be sent over to the local VA medical center. Most often we do get those consults sent over to us, and someone from the suicide prevention team, specifically a suicide prevention coordinator, is going to follow up within 24 business hours to do some follow-up, to do further assessment, to offer those resources. We have folks who call that number, maybe have never even stepped foot into the VA, and they're like, I've never even thought about the VA, and they just want information. You know, how do I get registered? How do I go about? There are so many reasons to call 988 press 1. If you don't like to talk, you can text at 838-255, or you can chat at veteranscrisisline.net. As a previous suicide prevention coordinators managing those consults that came over, I still remember one consult that we received. It was from an individual who saw a veteran outside of a laundromat. This was a stranger, but saw this individual who was in need of some help, and a stranger called the Veterans Crisis Line, and then we followed. I did the follow-up with the individual. So, you know, you can call that number. It's 24/7. It's a great resource for our veterans.
Can
and
you
their
call
families.
988 and remain anonymous?
We will get consults from the Veterans Crisis Line, and it's anonymous. We don't know who the individual is, but we're still going to follow up.
I mean, like if you are an individual who's in crisis and you call 988, you don't have, because the reason that I ask is remaining anonymous sometimes is the only reason someone is willing to call.
Right.
And you can literally save a life because they don't want to tell anybody, or they're not prepared to go to the hospital, but they will call 988 because they're anonymous. And
so I can't speak to 988 specific, but I know
Yeah.
I definitely, at the Detroit VA, when I've received consults from veterans, they've been anonymous, you know, so that I can say 100%. And we
So
don't
that-
necessarily we just have the phone number to give a call back to.
So
and check
that's a
in.
bit, that is an entree to call, that's permission to call. You know, I can get help and I don't have to tell anybody who I am.
Well, Vern, did you say you wanted to add something to that as well?
Just one of the things when we talk about the VA, and I remember at the very beginning, you know, people talk about the process and trying to get in. I think is really important when that veteran makes that step and they get connected to the VA. I think as they're going through the process, I think it's important to kind of say, you know, listen, you made that first step, but you don't have to. I mean, you're waiting to get into the VA or get the services, but there are a lot of other resources outside of the VA for you to connect to as you're processing. You know, there is peers, the groups, there's the Veteran Navigator, there's other types of support groups. There's, let's not forget about our female veterans, you know, also there are female support groups. There are a lot of resources that really are out here. And I think one of the biggest things that's missing is that it's like not out there in that community. Like, where are the places that veterans frequent so they can grab those resources? The party stores, the churches, the barbershops, the beauty salons. And I think, you know, going into those places, connecting, having that information available, at least so there's something, hey, there's a support group that you can go to until you get into the VA. Having that information out there, I think, could be huge in helping a veteran. So I think making more connections and connecting with community leaders in terms of helping keep that veteran going.
Yeah.
You know, that I think that's something that an area that we could all, you know, really work for and make sure that veterans know that. So don't just wait. Find something else in between until you can get in there.
Right. And I think, you know, being a non-active duty state,
Yep.
we don't have any active duty bases.
Which makes it even more critical.
It kind of
yep.
makes it, you know, more critical for sure, but it kind of, I don't know, at least I know for my husband, he's felt very disconnected from the military, any kind of military lifestyle, because, I mean, our closest base is Selfridge,
which is,
and
that's a guard base too.
Yeah, and it's
Not an
it's
active
super
duty
far
base.
from us, and you know, we can't access it because we have to have you have to go in to pass an ID and you have to register and all of that. But he works during the week, and they don't pass an ID doesn't work on the weekends.
Right.
So it's creating a barrier for access to feel any kind of connection. So having our local communities be able to offer resources and connection, I think, is really important. That leads me into asking Chaka, can you tell us about what you do in your role as a veteran navigator and how you help connect people to those resources?
So as the veteran navigator, it's navigation. I hate to say that's kind of a play, but it's that navigation, right? It's that advocacy. I've been working pretty heavily in the veteran community about 17 years now, and my main thing was trying to figure out the why. The what I would hear veterans historically. My dad used to work for the VA. It was in Allen Park, you know. I hate the VA. I don't know. Or, you know, why? What's wrong with this system, and why you would have this, you know, this hate or whatever. I don't want anything to do with veteran. I just, you know, I've talked to veterans and they say I just took the uniform off. Once I got out, took the uniform off, threw it in the back. Why? So a lot for me was to figure out the why. What happened? Why did you want to, you probably serve and now you just want to throw that uniform in the closet and call it a day? Well, what is it with this VA system that makes you dislike it so much? So for myself, I had to figure out, before I can try to figure out how to advocate, fix, or whatever, I had to figure out, well, what is the registration process? So I had to go down to the VA and go through registration and talk to the folks at that time and figure out, that is pretty, yeah, I'd be frustrated too, you know, kind of deal. Talking to, at this time now, you know, thousands of veterans over all these years, what happened on base? How is base life? What? Okay, well, Chuck, I'll tell you. And that's why you want to take the uniform and toss it. Well, we talk about suicide. Well, what is it about this institution of military that would have you prompt these suicidal ideations? So, talking to these veterans, yeah, I can see. So my closest thing, you know, was coming from doing a brief stint in law enforcement, understanding that bravado and law enforcement, they don't. It's the same as military. We're here to help. Mm-hmm. I love the Marine Corps. Like I said, my dad being in the Corps, and I'm that close to joining the Corps way back. He was so happy, man. I was 18 and everything. But their commercials, they run to the fight. I love those commercials there, the discipline. I would say they have some of the best, and they would show all the Marines pointing out their lancets out that way, and you have, it's that
warrior.
Warrior. Oh, I love it, man. I love it, but you see, they're pointing outward. We're running to the fight, but there's no one to figure out what's going on in the war fighter type of deal, you know. And I remember one time speaking to, like I said, over my years. There was a gentleman that reached out one day, and this is going back to your question, you know, what's out there for him. A young Marine reached out to me. Well, he was referred to me, and just like Isaac said, went in at 18, did 4 years, was gutted mentally, and he stated that he came back and didn't feel like the same person. And he was
because he wasn't.
What he just said there, I told him that.
That part.
I told him, well, my friends and family can't relate to me anymore. I can't keep a girlfriend type of deal. And so I listened to him, and he said, man, I'm almost up to a fifth a day. You know, he was hitting it pretty hard. Mm-hmm. And I sleep next to my shotgun. And he's like, man, am I different? What's wrong with me? I said, number one, you are different. And I know in the behavioral health world, to acknowledge that you are different, that was taboo. We can't. Now you're stigmatizing them. Mm-hmm. But how can? And I told him, I said, sir, how can you not be different? Exactly. You went in young, you went overseas, you saw things that these video games, they make video games mm-hmm. about, and Hollywood romanticizes. You are different. Mm-hmm. I said, there's nothing wrong with that. Right. While your friends were playing Call of Duty, you lived that, so to speak, mm-hmm. kind of deal. You are different, sir. And I remember he got quiet. I said, there's nothing wrong with that. Mm-hmm. I said, but I can't have you drinking yourself to death. Right, mm-hmm. right. I said, you want to sleep next to your weapon? And my roommate doesn't like that. I said, yes, he does not like you being mm-hmm. liquored up, and you got a 12 gauge next to your bed. So I'm saying all that to say that step one is showing that empathy and that sympathy. Mm-hmm. So that was the first thing before I can refer to these various resources out here. Mm-hmm. That's why I saw that the clinical is not the answer for everything.
Right. And you affirmed him Chaka, that's the other thing you do. You connected to him and you affirmed him.
Just let him.
You
Hey,
said it was okay.
It's okay. You're not different. You will never be the same person ever again.
Trauma and grief changes you.
One of the things that a very similar situation when I had a conversation with a vet at the peer support group a while back, and almost an identical scenario where the gentleman was saying, my friends and my family, I don't relate to them, they can't relate to me, and I flipped it on him and I said, go back to active duty when you were in the Corps, and you look at everything in the military is rules and regulations. There's literally an order that tells
everything.
you how to talk, how to stand, how to walk, the amount of inches your belt buckle is supposed to be from the left of your belt loop, everything.
Where your medals.
And I said, if you were to have your friends and your family come and live a day in the life of a Marine in the Marine Corps, they wouldn't survive because the rule system is different.
Right.
You come out to the civilian world, there's a different rule set.
Right.
You have to be adaptive enough to go back to living in a world where the rules are very different. And you're not going to carry the rules from where you were and implement them and hold all the people that are in your life accountable to those rules.
Right.
So
that's the challenge.
And the
That's the challenge.
again is you have to have the bandwidth to have multiple operating systems.
Yeah.
So I never tailored it to be like you're the problem, but I did say you're a minority moving back into a population set of people who have a very different lifestyle and rule set.
Right.
And it's going to be very uncomfortable for you to move into that lifestyle again.
Right.
Yeah, and then I
But-
think that's what people forget too.
But
Yeah.
you go to church.
We forget that.
I'm not the best and most religious person in the world, but when I go to church, there's a lot of rules in Catholic church how I was raised, and there's certain things you stand up, sit down, like you do certain things in church.
It's ritualized.
There's ritual, there's routine, and you got to read the room, and you got to be able to understand all the people and the dynamic of the room, and tailor yourself to that. The hard part is figuring out how to do it and growing through that discomfort because humans don't like change.
Right.
And especially military humans. So when you get them off of their routine and you tell me to not wake up at 4:30 and work out in the morning, it ain't happening.
Yeah, but this gets back to control equals safety.
Yeah.
Rules equals safety.
Yep.
Confidence equals safety. I need help, I'm in danger, I need to feel safe. So unfortunately, sometimes the default is not seeking help.
Mm-hmm.
And that touches on another level of as well, mourning who you were in the eyes.
Yes.
Oh,
yes.
Yeah,
Yes.
exactly. Yeah, thank you. Because I think when you say that, and you talked about that minority coming back to the majority, people don't. Only 1% of the United States serve.
Right.
That's very small. 1% of the population.
Right.
We are a very, very small percentage.
Right.
Okay, and you have this percentage, this very small percentage coming back in,
Right.
just like you said. To the majority.
I mean, a fellow
Yeah.
veteran. How
Yeah.
many veterans do you know that say, God, I hate working with civilians? Like,
I'm one of them. True transparency.
and here we are.
I'm one of them.
But it's not our job to mold our civilians to work like we work.
Exactly.
It's our job to adapt into the new environment we're
It's
in.
challenging. Thank you.
And that we're in your world, and we have to grow
We gotta
and be
adapt.
comfortable and adapt.
Yeah, it is. I say that. I go, gosh, I don't know how they survive. I don't know how they live. I don't understand how they communicate in the military. We got this, we got that. How are they running a corporation?
Right.
Exactly.
I would say, Laverne, you hit on a lot. Like, being in this role, what I saw was a lot of misinformation in the civilian world. And I saw how it was broken. To take someone that did 23 years, 4 years, 20 years, and you drop them back in a society that is TikTok, it's me, 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 me. If you're coming from an environment where logistics was important, let alone infantry, let alone that we need the guys in the motor pool. It was a cohesive. I need the guys that's gonna fly the plane because they can provide that coverage or whatever situation is while we're clearing out such and such to a society that, hey, look at me, look at me. And what I saw was that society and military, and I came to this assertion that military's job was to train you up to fight for our nation, if not, almost to the point where if you have to die, then that's what you have to do. So yes, there was going to be a gap in, okay, now I got to reacclimate you back to civilian life. That's a hard, I trained you up, like you said, I gave you this operating unit, now I'm supposed to put that unit back in your head to reacclimate. So I saw that the onus was more so on the civilian world. They needed to understand military culture.
Or at least have some more empathy.
Have more empathy.
Yeah.
That's what I saw. What I saw, and this is not being military, I didn't, but I saw this disconnect where how can you expect this guy or girl just to reacclimate, go get a job at your local Walmart, have a good day, but he or she lived something. So what I saw was the disconnect in the civilian world where clinical, okay, why is the first thing clinical here, take these meds? Why is that the default?
Because that's the easy answer.
That's the easy.
Because it's the easy answer. Here, take these meds. Shut up and get out of my face.
But you can't medicate my trauma, i.e., ACEs.
No,
you can't medicate death that I saw, experience, etc. You can't do that. And thank God now we have with moral injury taking more of a precedence where now you're having behavioral health having to understand it's a moral injury issue. Not everything is PTS, and how those two can overlap. So now you need different treatment options. That employer need to understand that veteran you're working with may show a few challenges, but look at where he came from, and once he acclimates, he's going to be your best because he understands. Everywhere we go, Isaac is 15 to 20 minutes early. Wherever we go, that's an awesome trait. Right?
Because if you're on time, if you're early, you're on time. If you're on time, you're late. If you're late,
it's unacceptable.
It's unacceptable.
Unacceptable.
See, that's that mindset. Right. So what employer would not benefit from something like that?
Right.
But with that employer, you need to understand you're taking someone that has to reboot their operating system and has to acclimate. So what I just see as Navigator is more of an educational advocacy and that empathy. Having that empathy in civilian world toward these individuals and not look at them as broken. And not everything is in a prescription bottle. Right. That's not fixing it. It's not working. The suicides are even higher when you have these, but maybe sitting down and talking to me, maybe doing a deeper dive and figuring out what happened. And what can I do going from here?
And what will work best for you? What do you think works best for you
There's a big
to help
difference
you heal?
between being wounded and being ill. And I've worked in healthcare for 30 years, and I now understand, listening to this conversation, why vets are attracted to law enforcement. But I've worked in large New York City hospitals, and they are run like the military. I used to call my brother when I used to have to pass those exams for crises responses, like where the command posts were, and it was like, Pat, you gotta help me pass this test.
Oh, good. They're catching on.
But
sorry,
I have to say, I worked in New York City Hospital at the first World Trade Center bombing, and we worked like clockwork. Everybody had a role, which meant that I'm a PT. We were downstairs with every single mobility aid in the hospital to receive the incoming trauma. I was also there during World Trade Center looking at that trauma response, everybody's downstairs with the gurneys and the mobility aids, except no one's coming. Even before, I remember seeing, because I knew what it was like to participate in that. And everybody is just like stuck on. Hospitals are hierarchies, they are not egalitarian. You go down the chain of command because they have to function in crises, and they did. But it was just horrific to see all of the empty gurneys, beds, wheelchairs, because nobody was coming. No one survived. Where the first World Trade Center bombing, which was the bombing in the, everybody was coming, and the wounded were coming, and so healthcare is very similar.
It has to be.
It has to
And
be.
it's because the similarity.
You have to give up your
Yeah.
individuality in order to function and play your role, and you are a team, and everybody right down to the person who washes the floor is part of that team.
The commonality, especially in the medical profession, and there's trauma and emergency room and hospital care, and then there's mental health care. And medical, there's a giant spectrum of medical care. In mental health, the wounds that we're facing and dealing with and coping with are very different than an amputation or a bleed out. In the military and in hospitals and in trauma care and in ER, everything is life sensitive and time sensitive. That's why the hospitals run the way they do, is because if we don't stop the bleeding now, this person's going to die. If we don't do X in combat, people are going to die.
So
In mental health, there's a lot more gray area, and there's a lot
true.
more
Yeah.
ambiguity.
That's very true.
yeah.
And there's complex human emotion.
Yeah,
And-
because in regular physical health care, we can run a blood test and we can tell you definitively
Yeah,
you have
that's
X
right.
diagnosis.
It's a bone.
And-
Hey, there's a bone sticking out of your leg and you're bleeding, or
Whereas in
depression is
Right.
not that easy.
right, whereas in
Can't always see it.
in mental health care,
can't
right,
see it.
it's
Can't see
it could
always.
be.
It's different.
I mean, you've got so many different things that it could be,
Yeah.
and like I know you and I have talked before about the differences between PTS and moral injury, and that's just now coming to the forefront.
Right.
And they need to be treated very differently.
Yep.
You cannot treat a moral injury the way that you would treat PTS, because it's a completely different, you're gonna make it worse.
Yeah.
And I think that's probably why so many have struggled for so long, because it's really a moral injury. It's not necessarily PTS. They have a soul wound,
Yep.
which is different than a mental illness.
Exactly.
Would
So-
you say more about that? Moral injury.
Yeah, you
So
gonna take-
moral injury, Chaka does trainings on them. I've taken his training as well as a training through Michigan State University. And moral injury is, PTS is usually something that you are exposed to. Moral injury is usually something that you've done. So like your gentleman that you were talking about earlier, that he committed a murder.
Yep.
Well, that's a moral injury. That goes against who he was,
His
as
values,
his
yeah,
values, his person.
Mhm.
Whereas if he were to, he's in a combat zone and he gets blown up, that's PTSD.
Your poster. That's what happened
So
to you.
that's what happened
Happened
to
to
you,
you.
whereas moral
Right.
injury is more what you happened to somebody else or something else.
Yeah.
Right.
So in treating them, they need to be treated very differently.
Mm-hmm.
Yep. But you can't. What I look at, and it's from a not just even a faith perspective, but man is a three-part being. He has a soul, he has a body, but he has a spirit. And if I was raised in a certain way that, thou shalt not kill, thou shalt not, however, maybe my faith, and then I go into, if I'm a first responder or I'm an EMT or, like I said, military, and I saw a child die, or had to take a life of a child, unfortunately, because they can impact my squad because they have a grenade or they have such and such. Am I a good person? I'll never forget, I had an individual ask me, was he a good person? Because he was in a situation, in Iraq, and they had to take the life of what they considered an enemy combatant, but they had to do it in a stealth-like manner. And they had him call me. I could tell when he called me that he was high on these multiple medication, not alcohol. He's on a series of meds, 5 or 6 medications and all that. and he asked me, because they could not be dispose of move the body, anything like that. They would have brought attention to themselves, and they had to leave that individual in a corner. And it's not being graphic, but these are the kind of calls, these are the interactions I would have with these men and women. And I said, well, did you guys try to cover the body? He said, no, we weren't going to use our stuff to cover this enemy combatant. But he said, after a while, because they had to be in this location for 2 to 3 days, and that had to sit with that dead individual. And he said, after a while, I think he started smiling at us, though. But I can tell at that point he was more of a psycho type of deal.
Right.
But he asked me this question: do you think I was a bad person for not covering his body? And I had to and that's why I picked
So that's
the
the
moral
injury
injury.
part.
And I told him, no, I don't think you were a bad person for not covering. You'd have been, if you desecrated it, but leaving it where you found it, so to speak. But he asked me that. And so I remember getting off the phone with him and calling down to, thank God, the VA. I would say the VA now, I guess I don't know how you guys were working with it back in the day, but now I can call and mental health or whomever, and folks are going to answer and they deal with it. And I remember calling down to the mental health component down at the VA, and I advocated for it. I said, can you guys, and they had him in the system, his last 4, and can you add moral injury, or at least a treatment component of moral injury, to his treatment plan? And I never forget the individual, and she said, yep, we can handle that and all that. Because it was more of a moral injury and not PTSD.
Are there treatment protocols for moral injury? This is a recognized...
It's now gaining a lot more.
It's not getting a lot more traction.
It's not
Yeah.
a DSM, it's not a DSM
It's not a
diagnosis,
But it's
in
getting
terms
more
of
and more traction.
Yeah, because
diagnosis
how
and
many
everything,
war
but it's
movies have
something.
said, Ma, it's not the dying, it's the killing that bothered me. Ma, it's not the dying I was
Yeah.
afraid of, it was the killing I was afraid of.
Exactly.
Well, that's like I said. It's because, unfortunately, mankind wanted it to just. I can treat your brain, but what about my soul? Well, I am a soul. I am a living, breathing. I'm not just like I hate to say like a German Shepherd that once it dies, no. I have a soul with emotions and feelings and things like that. You have to treat that, and what that has done to the behavioral health world is it's forced them to change that. And now you have treatment modalities that address moral injury. CPT, but now there's a religiously based CPT and things
There's
like
a
that.
lot of things.
Yeah,
that
there's a
come
lot of
out,
different things
right.
now.
You can
So.
speak to some of those things.
Oh yeah, for sure.
Tina, how does the VA provide ongoing support for veterans not maybe while they're in crisis, but also like ongoing?
Yeah, so first I wanted to kind of address it, just as I was sitting here, just when we were talking about stigma, this was a little bit earlier, it just kind of brought something to me that, talking about mental health, we need to start that young, right? We need to, have those conversations with our children, with our friends. Having, worked in mental health for many years beyond what I've just been at the VA, I have 3 kids. I have one in college, one in high school, and one in elementary school, right? 10 years from oldest to youngest, 2 boys and then my daughter. So with my boys, especially after I moved into suicide prevention, I started having conversations with them when they were young, right? About suicide, about having these thoughts, about mental health. And and just brought something to me. So a few years ago when my younger son, he was in 7th grade, a classmate of his told him that this individual told him that she was having some thoughts of suicide. So he came home, he told me, because I had those conversations with him, right? And so I had her family, her parents' information, and I reached out to her parents, and then everything worked out well. But in following up, what I remember is that her father told me, she told my son because she knew he would tell someone, and so I think about that, right? And that's because I've had those conversations. So I kind of really want to bring that in here, because I think that's it's we have to have those conversations and just letting our kids, like I said, letting our friends know we struggle sometimes. Everyone struggles. There's no one out there that hasn't struggled, and it's okay if you need to go talk to someone. So I wanted to mention that.
No, thank you.
Yeah.
That's a valuable contribution. Absolutely.
And now ask me that question again, so I forgot what you originally asked me. I was like, I wanted to bring that up.
What are some of the support, the ongoing support for veterans, like people, obviously if you go to the hospital, you go to the emergency room, you're going to get help, right? But what are some of the things that can the can veterans go to just a random hospital and when they're in crisis and still be able to use their VA benefits and not have to worry about, well, if I go to the hospital right now, it's going to create more problems because then I'm going to have a huge bill or I'm going to lose out on, whatever the case may be. Will the VA help with that?
So Stephanie, you've done some research on the Compact Act, I saw. So she's looked that up. So yeah, for sure. So I think what's important is that not everyone who served is eligible for the VA services, right? And I don't know if not everyone knows that, right? And that's where CHACA, comes into play with connecting those resources outside of the VA.
Would you say that again? Not everybody knows
Not
that?
everyone who served is eligible for VA services, but there are so many resources outside of the VA
Okay.
for those who served. But going back to that, so yes, a veteran, someone who served, can present to an outside hospital. It doesn't have to be to a VA. If they are, what we want them to do is to present if they are in what we call a suicidal crisis. They can absolutely do that. And what will happen, they may then be eligible to receive services free of charge, up to 30 days of free inpatient care, up to 90 days of free outpatient care under what's called the Compact Act. Okay, so what the VA is doing with the Compact Act is we're telling folks, we don't want you to worry about cost. We don't, we don't want you to wait. We want you to go in when you are at that point where you're having those thoughts of suicide. You've developed, like, leaning towards, I think I'm gonna act on those thoughts, and you've got a plan going. We want you to present to that hospital. The VA will look to see if we can help and pay for that care related to that hospital. With the Compact Act, what that has done is that it's extended VA eligibility beyond what's called the minimum active duty standards, right? So you have, for VA care, you have to have some minimum active duties, standards, right? I'm not an eligibility expert, so I don't want to speak too much on that. But with Compact, it expands that beyond what I'll call the norm, where we might be able to impact up to an additional 9 million veterans to be able to receive care.
Wow.
With the Compact Act, you do not have to come to the VA for services. That individual, if eligible, and there are eligibility criteria for the Compact Act, and as long as that outside hospital has to report it to the VA, right? So there's a whole process to that, which we won't be able to get into here. But if that individual is eligible to fall under the Compact Act, might only be eligible under the Compact Act for care, does not have to come into the VA for care. We want them to come here. We want to treat our veterans. We at the VA believe we provide the best health care for our veterans. But under Compact Act, you do not necessarily have to come in for that
Do
care.
VA hospitals have acute services? Like, for instance, if you are near a VA hospital, can you present like you do to an emergency room and there's...
Absolutely. So with the Compact Act, you can present to the VA, you can call the Veterans
But I'm
Crisis.
saying, but if you can.
Right. So you can call the Veterans Crisis Line, and then ultimately, if you're transported to a hospital, VA or non-VA, you present to the VA hospital or non-VA hospital. But the VA has to treat, as a civilian, if I wasn't employed by the VA, but if I walked into the VA, I was downtown for some reason, the Midtown area, and I injured myself, and I took myself to the VA emergency department, they have to even treat me as a humanitarian, right?
No, but if I'm a vet
Yes, you can
in
absolutely walk
crisis,
in.
can I walk, is there an
Yes.
emergency room?
Yes,
A
at the
VA
Detroit,
emergency room that you can walk into.
Detroit VA, not all VA medical centers.
That's
have
Detroit
one.
has one, Ann Arbor has one.
Does Battle Creek?
Flint,
Oh.
or I'm
Battle
sorry,
Creek.
not Flint, Saginaw has
Battle
one.
Creek does not have one, they have an urgent care
Okay,
center.
urgent care.
though.
And to tune from experience to tune in with what Tina's saying, I've seen a huge shift in VA services. Like the
Yeah, it's
VA
changed. It's
has
changing.
done an incredible job of increasing the quality of care for veterans,
Yeah.
access to care.
Yeah.
So and when I encounter curmudgeonly veterans who are like, VA, I'm like, well, why? Tell me more about it.
Right.
Because
When was your last contact?
because when was your last contact with them?
It's
Because
changed.
I'll tell you, I'll use myself as an example. I had an emergency situation where I had to go to the hospital at 3 a.m. and I was not in the condition to drive myself. I was kind of panicking because for the first time as a mid-40s adult. I didn't have my wife or anyone to lean on or depend on. Thankfully, my kids weren't with me that night, but I needed to go to the ER. And I was kind of freaking out, and I called 911, and I got emotional because I was like, I need help now. I can't do this by myself. Oh crap. Here it is, going back to what we were talking about. I can't do it by myself right now. Like, I need somebody to take care of me. And EMTs responded. They put me on a gurney, loaded me in a ambulance, and took me to Beaumont. It was a little bit of admin work that I had to do on the tail end to get it covered, but it was covered because what the VA understands is one of the biggest things that veterans were complaining about is like, well, I'm not going to be right next to an ER that's ran by the VA when I have an emergency. You know, like if I'm 50 miles, 60 miles, 200 miles away from a VA facility when I, you know, blow my ankle out snowmobiling or something like that, they can't expect me to drive 200 miles to a VA ER. So the Compact Act is revolutionary because it put the healthcare in the hands of the providers and the individual to say, you got a situation, go and get it taken care of.
Well, that's for if you're in an acute suicidal crisis,
Correct.
right? So, and not to cut you off, Isaac, but also, you know, so that's why it's important for hospitals to notify the VA. But if you again broke your ankle and you're presenting to Beaumont Hospital, whatever the case might be, we still want those hospitals to notify the VA because that treatment at Beaumont may be able to be covered under some, and you don't have insurance, right?
Sure,
you know,
sure.
may be able to be covered under some other payment authority at the VA. So outside hospitals notifying the VA, but then to go back to what you're asking, yes, so you can, you know, as a veteran, you know, I've never stepped into a VA, but I'm in Detroit and I hurt myself, whatever, that individual can present to our emergency department. We have eligibility subject matter experts. They will work to confirm that individual's eligibility. But at a minimum, we are going to treat that person on a humanitarian basis until that eligibility for VA care can be determined. But another, so Compact Act, I've got lots of information on that, but another program that we offer through the VA for those who may be struggling, you know, with suicidal thoughts is something called our Staff Sergeant Fox Grant Program. So what that is where the VA, and this probably initiated maybe a few years ago, maybe this is the third year of it. So what that is that the VA provides grants to those who've applied, you know, and if they're worth the grant in the community to provide services, case management services related around suicide prevention, other needs for that person. The individual doesn't have to be in an acute suicidal crisis or anything like that. So through the Staff Sergeant Fox Grant Program, what that part of that grant mandates for those individuals or those grantees that they have to refer to the VA if that person needs mental health or behavioral health services. But a recent change with the grant program that just went into effect, and I want to make sure I get this correct here, that states is that, because a lot of those folks who are maybe working with the grantee, maybe they already have that VA eligibility and they might already even be connected to the VA, but you're going to have some who are not connected to the VA. But a change with the grant is that this, because of that, say you have to refer to the VA for those mental health or behavioral health services, those who maybe were previously not eligible for VA services may now become eligible for VA services while receiving part of this grant program. Now, I don't have all the details on that, but that's another thing that the VA has done, and with the Office of Suicide Prevention has done to really expand our suicide prevention efforts into the community.
Do hospitals routinely ask patients if they're vets?
All the time.
I think
you know,
Yes,
is it-
every time I've gone in emergency room.
I think they
Yeah,
pretty much
they
have
have
started,
to.
I
they
think
know to
it's
start
on-
adding
on
that.
the
It's on the
Yeah.
questionnaire.
Yeah.
So the
They
mechanism
ask.
is in place that if you're a vet,
Yes.
it
And we ask them
triggers-
to ask people, have you served, right?
Right.
Because
I
not
was about
everyone,
to
my
say
husband's
that.
a veteran, but my husband's,
Right.
you know, he went to Michigan State, he did our OTC, did his 4 years as an officer, right, you know, and then he was out, so peacetime. He doesn't necessarily, I make him, I'm like, you're a veteran, you know, make sure you know,
He is,
he's
yeah,
not
for
eligible
sure,
for VA
yeah.
healthcare or anything like that. But I make sure he identifies himself as one. But
Yeah.
not everyone wants to identify them. But if you ask them, have they served?
Right.
That's
Yeah,
going to be a
yeah.
whole,
That's a
will
whole
be.
nother.
Yeah, but it is a question
Response.
on it is a question
So,
on
so
all
that infrastructure
on
is in place. Have you served? And
It's
it
in
triggers.
place.
or they say, are you a veteran?
Yeah.
Every
Yeah.
time I've done a medical or gone into
Okay.
emergency room, they do ask me,
Are you?
you know, it's on the application, are you a veteran?
Okay.
Yeah,
We,
it is.
and the main thing was,
It is.
like they were saying, that vernacular though. Have you ever served to argue
No,
veterans?
Language.
Yeah.
Because what if I got a other than honorable, or I got medically discharged, right? Or my time in service was not the best in the world, so I may be, clammed up with that, like, no, I'm not a vet. I never went to war, that kind of deal.
Yeah,
So
that's a big
vernacular-
one if you
Right.
didn't serve in
Yeah,
combat.
Yeah.
I've had veterans tell me,
Yeah.
I didn't know maybe that they're new to the VA. And this was
Right.
more when I was in the patient care side of the house. I didn't know I could come to the VA because, I didn't lose a limb. Well, most veterans haven't lost a limb,
Right,
right?
right,
Or I didn't
right.
serve in combat. Well, you don't have to have served in combat.
You're a combat
You
veteran
know,
and veteran.
And then you mentioned, Chuck, the other than honorable. I just want to mention that over maybe the last, 7 to 8 years ago, the VA now has expanded services for those who have an other than honorable and OTH discharge
Right.
may be eligible for mental health services through the VA. There's different eligibility requirements, but I'd like to mention that. So that's another population that maybe I hate the VA
Right.
because they weren't previously eligible, right?
Right.
But now they
Right.
may be eligible.
So what if you're a vet that served in a war zone, like the Gulf War,
Mm-hmm.
but in the Navy, but wasn't injured?
You're still a veteran.
You served.
You're-
You
I mean,
served.
they're all veterans,
Yeah,
right? You
yeah.
consider a combat vet?
But
Yes.
180 days makes you a veteran, right?
Right.
Yeah, but are you considered a combat vet?
So
It
there's
depends.
a lot of
There's a
different
lot of
there's a
things.
lot of different
Yeah.
prerequisites, but then
Yeah.
ultimately, like when you're on active duty, if you deploy, there's certain zones in the world
Right.
that are declared combat zones.
Exactly.
And it's because there's an ongoing conflict or engagement or battle or skirmish going on. And that branch of service, their administrative folks, when that service member separates, it's the responsibility of the service and the service member to verify their service experience. So a veteran who was in the Gulf War, who was floating around on an aircraft carrier in the Persian Gulf, when they process out, part of their out processing is to ensure that on their DD-214, their
exactly.
release paperwork, they have it documented that they served in a combat zone for this period of time, and then the admin folks verify that. Yep, he was with this unit, or she was with this unit, they deployed here and here, boom, yes, combat veteran. And the VA has an entire system in and of itself that verifies your combat service, or your honorable service, or other than honorable service, or general discharge. And the admin folks, I don't want to be too long-winded, but I always tell veterans this that I serve. I say, it is your job. I don't care who you are. If you're the veteran and you're asking for help or you're asking for benefits, it's your job ultimately to advocate for yourself. And you need to ensure that you're filling the paperwork out correctly and that it's going to the appropriate person to get processed correctly. Now, there's a lot of confusion with that because we work with a lot of our older veterans or whatever the case is, and that's where people like us come in to help you out. But the younger generation, all the GWAT veterans, I give tough love because, I retired in 2020 and I enlisted in 97, so that spans a good time. You're in the same boat.
Yeah.
But the younger veterans, as I like to
Yeah.
say, I give them the most tough love because as soon as they start giving any kind of excuses, I dial it back and I say, well, tell me the steps that you've taken to walk through the system, because the system is very clear.
Yes.
Yeah.
And there's checks that you're supposed to put in boxes, and if you don't put the checks in the boxes, you're not going to get the benefits.
And there's instructions, right? Every line you fill out, there's an instruction to tell you what to put, what to say in that
just
line.
like with the
It's all
IRS.
adulting, right?
Yeah, well, the IRS, if you don't file your taxes properly, the IRS is going to come after you.
Yeah, that DD-214 will say everything if it's filled out right, and it'll say the campaign. It'll say, it's just got everything on there. How many days, blah, blah, blah. What zone you were in. That tells your story of where you were. And,
So I want to kind of shift gears a little bit. We've spent a lot of time on talking about veterans and their grief processes and suicide and resources and really great programs that the VA is now implementing. I'd kind of like to shift and talk a little bit about families. And I was going to start with you, Laverne, and if you could just kind of talk about how families can support veterans. And then without overstepping or being super intrusive, because I've seen movies, I can't remember the name of the movie right off the top of my head, but it was something where the husband went and deployed, came back, and the wife is like all up in his face, right? Like constantly, what is going on? Tell me what happened, what happened, what happened? And she's mad, and he's just trying to cope and like not traumatize her, and she's all pissed off. Well, so how can families support without pushing, without making our veterans feel worse, while also taking care of ourselves? What's our role look like?
Sure. So, I've had a few deployments, and of course left a family behind. My very first deployment, my youngest son was 8 months old. My oldest was 2 years old, okay, when I left. And that was many, many, many years ago. I mean, we've come a very long way. And so, good question. And I think back to that time. And then I also, have talked to my husband, asked for input, and, what did he feel he lacked? What did he feel? Or, how was I when I came back? And it's a huge adjustment, right? And just first of all, I had to get used to that. My house was not my house anymore. It's my husband's house. Okay? It was now his house, right? And so, just from that standpoint, as a veteran, in that sense, because he had been running things, 1 year, then I leave, I'm home for a few years, then I leave again, 2 years. And then he's running everything again, right? So there's kind of that shift, and that was a struggle for me. I think one of the things that we have to realize, so now talking from that family standpoint, from him and his feedback and this therapist's point, is that you have got to give us some space and give us the time to kind of process and integrate back in, and recognize that, again, we are used to that rigidness, and we come back home and things have probably gotten a little relaxed, and that's hard for us, okay? Because we're like, well, why are you doing it this way? And wait a minute, what is going on? I would say that giving us the space, and also educating yourself a little bit on the culture. Families are, especially if you're not active duty and you haven't lived on the base. I was National Guard. Okay, and for a National Guard family, it can be very isolating because you're living in the civilian population, right? Again, there's no base to go to. You're not, the neighborhood isn't filled with everybody's got someone serving. Okay, and so from that standpoint, it's like understanding the language and just giving us some time, understanding that culture. So educating yourselves on, maybe what we're experiencing, and just allowing us to kind of move back into it slowly.
What about, so that's after coming home from deployment. What about after transitioning out of service? Because that's a huge transition, not only for the veteran themselves, but like my husband, we lived on the base, on the active duty base. And I remember coming home, and I know how much he struggled, and I know how difficult it was for us with our marriage. And there's services for him. What about how do we help and support during that transition period when we're transitioning to?
Let me see your paperwork. What did they maybe give you? Can I take a look at your paperwork just to see, kind of file things away, kind of looking through to see what resources, because I guarantee you there was probably stuff that was given to them and it's just all, it comes all at us at so much, it's so much to take in. You might have to say, let me see what you got so I can see what's there to support you and to support us. And as Tina was saying now, as you know, you can make the phone calls, you can advocate, you can say, I'm here to assist, not to tell you what to do. Let's kind of figure out what's working. Also, if you've become the caregiver, if that person, it's all right for you to say, you know what, I gotta take a break to kind of take care of me too for a minute. You know, I've got to breathe. And have some tools that are ready for yourself, and realize you got to have some self-care, you know, and while you're taking care of this veteran and transitioning. And again, understanding, just as Jackie said, there are layers. There's a lot of layers. There's not only the stuff that we go in with, but then the stuff we pick up along the way as we're serving and when we get out. It's a big transition.
Right.
It really is. Like I said, you know, I know my husband was saying he felt like he served after I retired. It was like he served too. You know, he had a lot of respect, but it was a lot for him. And he was, and so there's another minority, a male spouse who didn't serve.
Right.
Okay, that's trying to figure it out.
That's a dynamic.
Yeah, whole different thing. So my husband was very isolated. You know, there were family support groups and things like that were part, but it's like I can't, you know, for many different reasons.
Sure.
Not wanting to be a part, you know, of that group at times.
Could I ask about the spouse who stays home? Like, is there like a lot of gatekeeping that happens? Which means that you just mentioned, I heard you mention the house was his, which meant there's gatekeeping. He's in control of the house and the children's schedule. You as the spouse, you're in control of, and coming up against that gatekeeping, like you're walking into somebody else's
Right. Yeah, you have to respect that. I kind of have to respect that, you know.
Yeah, we have to take over. We have to be the one running the household.
Right.
Is there a challenge?
I was gonna ask.
Is there what?
Your input.
Is there a challenge in dismantling?
It depends. Some stuff. Let me tell you. Some stuff I wanted back, and some stuff I was happy.
Yes.
Some stuff I was happy that he did.
To Laverne's point, and I went through this while I was on active duty, because I was constantly, you know, as an officer, I had hundreds of Marines under my charge, and I had to know that when we got home, we were going to go through all this debriefing, and we were going to go through all this reset. You know, they do a deployment reset where there's a lot of spiritual guidance, there's financial wellness, you know, like, because we're coming back from 6, 9, 12 months away from home.
Right.
You know, and I'm just going to speak from my perspective as the male, where mama has it, you know, she's running the ship. I have no place in that house. The kids, their schedules, their activities, their meals, their, you know, everything that they're doing, that ship is sailing, and the commander is mama.
Yeah.
And now I don't know what to do with my hands.
Right.
And there is an adjustment that happens between the dynamic of families when you're on active duty, where it's slow, and you have to feel each other out again, and you have to, you know, like, hey, if I unload the dishwasher, am I going to get scalded for it? You know, like, if I load it, is it going to be loaded the right way?
Right.
Or if you don't do it.
Yeah.
Right.
Like,
Exactly.
you've been gone forever.
Right.
Why aren't you just jumping back in and helping?
Right.
Like, that's a mindset that some have as well.
I can tell you one of the things I remember when I came home, and, you know, I'd been wearing uniforms, you know, 5 days a week, you know, sometimes 7. You know, I didn't have very many civilian clothes. And so I went to find to get civilian clothes to look for. I was looking for a particular thing. And I said to my husband, I was like, where are my clothes? And he goes, well, I put them in the attic. I was like, well, why? Well, I didn't know if you were coming back or not. I was just like, what? You know, that was really, seriously, that was just what and I was like, really? And he was like, yeah.
Wow.
Which there was grief. He was like,
well, I think when you're
you've been gone,
the urge to like just put closure in the hole.
Right.
And It's so different,
Just
you
put
know.
up that
Yeah. And 30 years ago, when I deployed, very different, right? We didn't have all the internet. We didn't have this influx of social media. He didn't know what was always going on. There was a 12-hour difference in time, 6 to 12-hour difference in time, and communicating, with him. And, okay, when can we talk? When can, I got to walk to the phone. It was just all those things very different than now, but his mindset, it was like, I like he started this grieving process or what, right after I left it, probably the minute I left.
Right.
Or whatever. And so, yeah, you come back and the family, it's different. And so I think the one thing he did miss, like what Stephanie was saying, and you talk about how families encourage and walk alongside that veteran or, that soldier or, that's come back.
Have a plan.
Yes, don't push.
Active duty is its own thing, and I think there's tremendous resources available, service dependent, that kind of facilitate the transition when you come back.
Yeah.
But because our jobs, specifically in the lines of veterans, we deal with veterans who are post-service, the majority.
Right.
I don't believe I handled maybe one active duty case the whole time that I've been on. Transition post-service and how you fit into the family is mind-blowing. And I'm speaking from my example. I retired, lost my identity. I knew what to wear, when to show up, what to do. I knew how to do my job efficiently, and that was my core identity. Something happened in the mix of all that. Thankfully, very later in my career, I waited to have kids. I became a father. So that was at the tail end of my career. And that sprinkled a whole bunch of chaos on my equation. Because as I was transitioning, I was not only losing my identity as a Marine, but I was trying to refine my identity in the midst of being forced into a new identity of parenthood. And now it's like, whoa, I went from moving 25,000 Marines and sailors from one corner of the world to the other, and combat operations and explosives and all this other business,
To house and babies.
a wife during COVID who was an essential employee 6 days a week, and I was home with 2 dogs and 2 kids under 2 years old, doing 3 meals and 4 snacks a day and nap time routines and the whole changing diapers and the whole bit.
Switch roles.
Completely switched roles. And I felt slighted because Mama would come home at the end of her shift, and here I am cooking and cleaning and ironing and doing laundry and changing diapers and doing pediatrician appointments and play dates all during COVID with masks and everything. And there was little to no appreciation for the role that I was doing. And it made me think and internalize and be grateful. And I feel that I did a good job of vocalizing my gratitude for when she did that job. But it was just like, that's your job. Deal with it. And there was no addressing the elephant in the room of like how vastly different my new identity was in less than a month. Because I went from this as a Marine to stay-at-home dad with 2 toddlers under 2. Figure it out. And now, as a man, as a dominant alpha, I'm supposed to have all these gentle, calm, maternal type instinct feelings with my children, and sprinkling PTSD and trauma and depression and anxiety and screaming babies and loud noises, and it was worse than combat.
So you're doing all this with a God hole
Dealing with
in your chest.
that transition. My first year out of service was worse than any combat that I ever saw in my life. And it was because I was not emotionally or mentally prepared for the trauma associated with parenthood. And I had to adapt, and I had to get used to that. So my support cast, to your question, what can a family do to support you through that? Understand that you're a service member transitioning from active duty and letting that go and letting all that responsibility and doing a 180 pivot from what they were doing to whatever it is they're doing now is a massive mental burden.
Do you feel like when transitioning out, so like you guys go through TAPS class,
Mm-hmm.
do you feel it would be beneficial for spouses to have their own version?
I know the Marine Corps does.
But that does exist.
Yeah.
And it depends. It's different. It's different. Active duty is very different from when you retire from Guard, Reserve.
Because I know it wasn't
Army.
offered to me.
It's very different.
And
it's not.
Coming
Right,
back
not
to
everyone.
a non-active duty state with very little veteran services, I didn't even know what a veteran navigator was until I started working here in 2019. And actually it was after that, I think, that I learned about Chaka.
Oh yeah,
And then, I mean, he was separated and transitioned out in 2013. So we were, what was that? What would that be? 6-7 years later? Like I'm finally learning about
Right.
services that are in the area.
You said
that-
finally.
Right.
Finally,
Now-
because it's not. There's no good smooth transition. Like there's
Right.
no
Exactly.
transition case managers, if you will, out there.
And that's why you have to say, "Can I see your paperwork, baby?" and look through it gently.
So you use the word
Gently
finally.
and ask the questions.
And my philosophy is it's never too late.
Right.
Because,
Right.
like, just because we're in a state that doesn't have active duty bases,
Doesn't
you know,
mean they don't give
we
you
learn. Humans are adaptive, and as long as you're provided the right resources and led in the right direction by people who know how to navigate those resources, and you're willing to navigate those
Right.
resources. Because I hear it from people all the time. They're like, "Well, I never got this, or I never got that." Did you look? You know,
Most of the time he's like, "No,
you know,
right?
and
I'm done.
let's start there.
I'm done." It's like
Let's
that
start
package.
there.
I'm done.
You know,
that
and
uniform,
then
that's it.
and then there's
I'm
people
done.
who I've run across who
Yeah.
are like, "Well, you know, I heard about this, this, and this, and this," and I said, "And where's all that reading literature at?" And oh, it's on my coffee table. I haven't opened it. It's been sitting there for the last 2 years.
Right. And stuff comes in the mail too, right?
Yeah, you know, and
Things
like
come in
on
the
a
mail.
daily basis, I get emailed
Yeah.
100 emails
Things
a
come
week
in the mail.
on
Yeah.
resources that are available to veterans, and it's
And I think now with the internet
oh yeah.
being what it is now, I mean, it was not the same 12 years
Yeah,
ago.
exactly.
I dealt with a
So-
person who, similar to you, let's say, where they were in a state, you know, and this is outside of the official capacity of what I do, but like it's very similar mentorship. They were in a state, didn't have an active duty base, and I worked with them. I said, okay, your service member's struggling, you're struggling, you don't know how to work together as a family and all that, post-transition. And I was able to coordinate with the family readiness officer from an old unit at Camp Pendleton, and I was able to gain approval for that person to be on a Zoom call for a week-long transition course that they provided to active duty service members in Camp Pendleton. And they went through all the same curriculum and got all the same resources. And that's the great thing about technology is
Yeah.
one of the benefits of these devices is you can Zoom.
Right.
Yeah, and you have
It's-
the resources.
It's
at your
nice
fingertips.
now, like the internet and the
Mhm.
connectivity that we have now. I agree with you. There's not a lot of excuses. Like, you know,
It's just willingness.
yes.
And that's coachable for all of us in the profession that we're in now.
But the other thing that I think that can hold people back too is you're in the thick of it.
Oh yeah.
And you don't, that's not something that you're thinking about. You're just thinking about daily survival.
Right.
Oh, the last thing on my mind when I was changing diapers on 2-year-olds was
Paperwork.
you know,
How can I
paperwork
get-
or attending a course on new parenthood or,
Right.
you know,
Right.
but therein lies the adaptability of humans, where it's, you know, you get to a point somewhere in your day where you have 30 seconds to have a clear thought,
True.
and then you
Or even I'm in the shower and God, I wish I
Yeah.
had some help with this.
everything starts with one step. Take the first step. Don't worry about a week from now or a month from now. Like, just get your right foot forward, left foot, right foot.
Right, and that's where the family, but that's where the family comes in and says, encourage you, like
Yeah.
you said, and
Yeah.
be that one step at a time with that soldier, with the veteran that's transitioning.
And,
It's
and where
encourage
families
and one step at a time.
and where the family can best support the veteran, one word: patience.
Mhm.
Just please be patient
Mhm.
and realize that the patience that you need is heroic. Like, I mean, it's not ordinary patience. It's, you're dealing with somebody who has gone through things that normal humans will
Nah,
never encounter or ever
exactly.
see.
Right.
So
And-
it's just, you gotta understand that it's like building a sandcastle with one grain of sand at a time.
Yeah, and they can't share everything. Everything you're just not going to share either. Things
Right.
that happen, you
Right.
can't because
Right.
of, you know.
Well, I mean, he's told
secrecy
me
and
plenty of
things like
times,
that.
if I told you it would traumatize you, and I'm not going to do
Can't
that.
share, or because
So-
of just
Right.
Or because
clearance
of,
of top
OPSEC,
secret,
yeah.
OPSEC, yes, intel,
Right.
things like that. So there's just some things they're just not,
right,
you know, we're just not going to share. We can't, you know.
Sure.
So that's, I think, that other thing, that autonomy, and again, working to figure out what works.
Yeah.
You know, what is going to help. You
And
know.
not put expectations on it.
Yes.
Mhm. Exactly.
Yes.
Yeah.
If you're a vet and you're receiving mental, like the confidentiality, can you tell your therapist?
Oh yeah.
Yeah.
So there you can tell your therapist you're protected, including like intel.
Yeah. Oh yeah. We have to. Yeah. We sign a confidentiality as a therapist, and it just stays there. The only thing is,
So
again,
there is a place one-on-one to bring
Mhm.
to bring
yeah.
those.
Yeah. If you're gonna hurt someone,
Yeah.
or you're
No,
gonna
no,
harm
no,
yourself.
Harm yourself or others.
Yeah. Mhm.
So, but like, there's a release when you
Right.
when you separate from active duty, regardless of what your background is, enlisted or officer or branch of service. What's supposed to happen is an NDA that's, you know, everyone gets a debrief on
Mhm.
where you were, what you did, and what you're allowed to talk about and what
Right.
you're not allowed
Right.
to talk about. And there are certain things that,
Not
depending
even to your therapist?
depending on where you were and what you did,
Yeah.
you're
So that's an additional challenge.
Of
Like
Yeah.
keeping that stuff in.
Yep.
gag order.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yep.
Gag order on trauma.
Mhm.
and
No.
there
I
are
wouldn't say
resources
trauma.
available, you know,
Yeah.
and there are therapists upon your
Yeah.
exit interview that you can speak with before you process out, and even tie back to if you need to. But you know, like, therapy is, there's a reason that the Privacy Act exists.
Right. And private practice, you can talk to me and tell me your trauma, what has happened. What I'm not going to share is how we went in. You know, like, give you a play-by-play of
Logistics.
plans and operations and things like that. But I can tell you what happened to me. I'm not going to give you the you know, I'm not gonna give you the op order. That's top secret. Or I'm not gonna give you the players, you know, or things like that.
Thank you.
But
That's
what
an
happened to
important-
me?
that's an important
Yeah,
distinction.
what happened to me? I can share, you know, and that therapist is, you do sign a confidentiality, and it's if you're gonna hurt someone or you're gonna hurt yourself, or abuse. You know, those are mandated, because therapists are mandated reporters, and social workers, we're doctors are, you know what, mandated reporters too.
Police,
Right, yes,
teachers.
there's,
Yeah.
mandated reporters of stuff like that, so, yeah.
So what about kids? Let's bring Nat Cole into this
So-
discussion.
Yeah. So quietly.
Yeah,
So-
yeah.
Kids, you know, our kids are dealing with this too. You know, I don't know if you guys know this, but the the flower for the military child is the dandelion, because they can grow and bloom anywhere regardless of their circumstances.
Yeah.
So military kids are super resilient. They really are. Like they blow me away. But they go through their own stuff too. They go through their own grief processes too, whether it be just having to move every 2 years and leaving behind their friends that they've made and the relationships that they've made with teachers and you know their peers, or maybe they do get that knock on the door and they've lost their father or their mother. You know, how do you help? How does your book help to show kids how to manage grief?
So my book, basically, I believe I support that, you know, the heart and love is our most powerful emotion. It's collectively our shield. And naturally, whether we understand our emotions or not, we know the impact of what it'll do to others. So my book focuses on more of like the connection, the love, the healing. It's okay not to be okay. And a lot of times there are unresolved, you know, it could be something that you wish you said, you didn't get a chance to say, or you may have left things off terrible. And you're left with those emotions and not sure, you know, how to feel about it once you hear that that person's passed away. So being in a veteran family, you know, the unknown, the energy that they sense that. Not to mention, you know, love itself. As parents, we naturally want to protect our children, so they also feel that they want to be strong and not worry you. So this book, you follow a little girl that has heard the news that she has family members that went away. She doesn't quite know how to process it. She has a unknown, at the time, connection with the moon, which is all the love we send to the moon. And he hears her cries, and he helps and he guides her through those emotions and kind of give her the tools to let her know it's okay, and basically take it each day as a time, because love is forever, never lost. And you know, the heart and how your loved one feels towards you just kind of reaffirms, you know, what you're feeling, how you're not alone, and kind of gives people a resource, because that's another part about grief. Being a parent, you know, if you're going through it as well, and to your point about everyone deals with it differently, and then depending on if you have the tools to learn how to deal with grief, you may not know how to react, you know, or how to be there. So I know even with myself in dealing with grief, we lost so many people. I have family in the military as well, and thankfully I haven't had anyone that close to me, you know, be lost due to that. But with the whole COVID thing, that kind of put everything in perspective. A lot of people that had many, many, many years ahead of them were lost. So this book, it helps adults as well learn that, you know, it's okay, and it gives a place to escape, and that's naturally what you do. If you don't, especially if you're not fortunate enough to have that circle, and like you said, it's all about being intentional. But again, it's coming back to the tools you have and kind of knowing, like, well, where do I start? You know, where do I start? So books are definitely like one of the first places that, you know, a child or anyone would visit to try to navigate through these complex emotions and learning that it's okay not to be okay, and it also opens up a dialogue with the parents to have with the kids, because it's difficult, you know, you kind of, you know, avoiding it is very easy to just like, okay, everything that, you know, will work itself out. Yeah. I just don't want to bring it up. You seem happy today, you know, but you have to check in, and this book is definitely an entryway into allowing them to have those conversations and know that they're not alone, and be able to understand, you know, what that process is going to be.
It's a good. Books are really good for children that are struggling with grief. As you know, working with families, it's important with children. You know, meeting them where they're at, based on their age, and explaining grief. And what's great about, you know, like you said with her book, you know, as adults, right, we can struggle with identifying emotions. So, and feelings. Imagine a child, right? Not having a vocabulary, not having the words, and a book, Lacey's Moon. That's what's great about that book, because it gives them the verbiage to be able to communicate it or figure it out where, you know, where they are. So when you're working with, when we face, you know, it's important to, you know, be honest, because going back to what Isaac said, right, we're all going to be experiencing grief. Nobody escapes it. It's inevitable. And so it's important to be honest, but meet them where they are in their age and explaining and talking with them and being honest.
I think kids are a lot, they understand a lot more than we give them credit for. And they pick up on more things than we think that they do. And I think having those conversations about grief and letting them know that if they don't want to talk about it, that's okay. But if they do want to talk about it, that the adults that are in their lives are here,
are able to,
and we can, you know, if we don't have the tools, we'll find somebody that does.
Right.
And that we can be the safe people in their lives.
Right.
Absolutely.
And the biggest thing, one of the biggest thing, as you know, those of us as clinical, we know the biggest thing is like relationship, right, with that person, and it's listening. Listening is more important than anything. You don't have to give an answer at all. If you can just listen and not fix. Okay, that's a lot of times people who are grieving, they just really want they want to witness their grief. They want their grief to be seen. And so how do we do that? The best way we do that is we just listen and affirm.
I like that witness to the grief.
Witness.
Just holding that space. And like you said, not trying to fix.
Right. Isn't it? That's what we see on social media. Seriously, when people are saying, I want to wish my mom a happy heavenly birthday, or my husband, or my daughter, or this, that is the witnessing their grief. And that's it. They just want to be seen. They want you to know that they hurt. And our jobs is like what? Give that thumbs up. Give that heart. Give that hug, you know, that hug or whatever. It's just witnessing their grief, and that is what we need to allow people to do instead of, you know, what we've been trained. And you know, I'm so glad we're starting to kind of really come away from that you know, 3 days off is not enough. And you know, we're recognizing that family extends more than just mom, dad, you know, now friends. You're getting that time off and things like that. And so I think, you know, as we talk about families and, you know, veteran spaces, just giving that space, witnessing, allowing them to witness.
So I want to kind of start wrapping things up. I wanted to give everybody kind of an opportunity to, if you had wanted to discuss something here today and we didn't get a chance to touch on it, to just give this opportunity for you to be able to do that now. And then we'll kind of wrap things up. John? You good? Okay.
Nicole? You're good? No, you were so silent.
You guys, I mean, a lot of what I was thinking and wanted to say, you hit the nail on the head with just knowing and acknowledging that there's different levels of grief, even with the military and veteran families, with the continuously relocating. There's just so many different levels. And, you know, to your point with when you're in the military, you had to be programmed to a certain reality and not give yourself false hope. And when you came back, it was like disbelief, you know. And then you're coming into your family home where they had to kind of do the same thing. Like, I have to take charge, I have to do this to make sure the kids and everything's all right. And then there's that mental part if they're, you know, leaving space for themselves. And it's like you're coming into that, and it's almost like it continues on for them, but it's just extra because it's a 360 on on the expectation and what you need to be, and just parenting alone is enough to kind of be like, whoa, what did I do? And you're like thrust into it, and there's no way you can say, well, okay, wait a minute, time out. You can't. So that is added stress, but from what I heard on the panel, as far as having those resources or a program or some way that the parents, or not parents, but the families know that, look, okay, with this transitional period here, with him or her coming home, there's, this part with the family that, realistically, this is what we need to, in order to be successful and not be like putting pressure on each other. But no, all the information that I've heard, I did not know that was available, and it sounds like for the civilization, for that information, even if you're not related or, at the moment don't even know anyone that's in the military, just to understand what they're going through, that should be more in your face. Then you have to seek for or make it an extra chore to have to find those resources. So absolutely, I think this is amazing here to just start this out, just to be able to begin to form it and bring that awareness, to let people know that you're heard, and there's resources available for you to help you get to that, take the next step. But that's literally what it is every day, the next step. And everyone has their own that they're dealing with, that again, as love, your armor, you instantly you want to protect. That's your natural instinct, you want to protect. And being able to see through that and making sure that you're taking the time to see through that is very important. So I thank you guys. It's wonderful.
Yeah. It's well put. Thank you.
Really to add, I would just emphasize making sure that you're empathetic, sympathetic. Just listening to Isaac, just like he's taking off, and I haven't even a month to process, and I'm thrust right in, and so someone being quick not to judge, I meant, well, you must not care about your family. No, I have to. What is this? So not being judgmental, being patient, and being empathetic and sympathetic. And if you want to do anything, advocate for more programs and more training, more grassroots efforts to help folks integrate from military or police and fire or social work. Understand what is secondary trauma, what is more so the community, get more education on things, so you're not quick to judge folk and everything like that. That's it. I believe that.
Good, thank you, Chaka. Good, yeah. So true, the judgment.
I am learning more and more. I tell everyone, and this is just who I am. I feel I am not accomplished unless I learn something every day. And, even if it's something really small, but in my field and what I'm doing now in my new walk of life, both professionally and ultimately as my number one priority as a parent, is every decision I make is made with love and sincereness, and there's a level of genuineness that comes in my decision making, because and I'm a tough dude, I got big emotions, and coming from an organization like the Corps, they try to weed all that out, and because there in combat there's no room for emotions. It's black and white, do or do not, and when you step away from that walk of life into something that is not necessarily so life and death, you have to understand how complex those emotions get and how there's a whole lot of gray area. And when you're dealing with people in the world of social work, you're dealing with big emotions and you're dealing with complex situations. And my ultimate message is just, you have to care about what you do Otherwise, find something else to do. Because if you don't care about what you're doing, and the person that's on the opposite end, the receiving end of the guidance and the mentorship and the resources and all the things that we do as social workers, that person has to feel like they're the center of the universe. And in the moments that you have with them, be it 5 minutes, an hour and a half of therapy, or a peer group, whatever it is, whatever capacity, if you're serving them in an official capacity in your job, they have to feel like they're the most important thing in the universe at that moment. And as long as you treat them with that urgency and with that importance, they'll feel it, and they'll feel the sincerity, and they'll trust you. And when you're trusted, you can't take that for advantage either. You have to understand that this person is putting all their confidence in me, that I'm going to do the right thing, I'm going to say the right thing, I'm going to be truthful, I'm going to follow up, I'm going to make them important enough to feel that their situation is going to be dealt with that level of urgency, and with the same. Everyone, you always look after number one. No one's going to look after number one the way that you are. And I tell my daughters this every day. Some people view that as selfish, but if you ain't taken care of, you're not able to take care of other people.
Mm-hmm.
So I'll leave you on the note of, in our field, it's important to be genuine and sincere and educate yourself with all the resources and take care of the people that you're taking care of, but you have to show up with a clear and level head, ready to give you 100%. So on the days where you're feeling off, or you're sick, don't be afraid to call your boss or your manager and tell them, I need to take some time off, I need to take PTO, I need to get my head right, because we got to be on our A game. When you come to work, you got to be ready to give 100% of yourself, and be willing to give that 100%.
Absolutely.
And then at the end of the day, be able to turn it off and turn that 100% back to your family or your loved ones or whoever it is that's in your immediate life.
Yeah.
That switch it's complex. You got to be able to throw it off and on whenever you need to, but don't get burnt out doing it, because you're only going to do a disservice to everyone in your life if you get burnt out.
Yeah. Yeah.
Watch the burnout.
When you're on an airplane, why do they have you put your mask on first before you put it on your kids, right? Because if you can't breathe, you're not going to be able to help them breathe.
Exactly.
Right? So
100%.
So I guess my takeaway would be for anyone, no matter veteran, non-veteran, whatever, if you're struggling, you're not alone. There are resources out there for you, right? And it's okay, like we've already said, it's okay to not be okay. We've all not been okay at some point in time in our lives. Everyone has. For our veterans, as you've mentioned, Isaac, our veterans were trained to do hard things, right? So when you're struggling, you got this, right? You can get through it, right? But you have to let someone know. It's okay to let someone know. If you're a family member, a loved one, a veteran, and you know that veteran's struggling, reach out to them. Do a check-in with them. Hey, what's going on today? I see that you're off. Because, I think when folks are struggling, you may feel like an island unto yourself. No one's going to get what I'm going through, right? So it's okay to check in with someone. We want you to check in. We want you to let someone know. So the Veterans Crisis Line, I'm going to give that plug again, 988-PRESS-1, really, really important number. If you're struggling, for our veterans, if you're struggling with suicidal thoughts and, you're not sure if you can keep yourself safe, we want you to present to that emergency department. We want you to call the Veterans Crisis Line. There are ways that the VA can support you through that crisis. We want you to be safe, and we want you to be here tomorrow with us.
Absolutely.
Just a couple of things. This was great discussion, great panel, and just that CNS is a huge partner, wanting to work with veterans, also partner with the VA. That is what we're seeing today, is a partnership, right? And us connecting together with the VA to help get veterans to where they want. And at CNS, it's like, you can come, if you're a veteran, you can receive services, we have that grant, but our ultimate goal, we are going to work with you to get you to those services to the VA if they are eligible. The other thing I want to say, just from a mental health, from that mental health and therapist standpoint, is that there's more than one modality. As Chaka was saying, pills, cannot always be that answer. And thank goodness, mental health is. I'm happy to see that they're embracing so many other types of ways to help veterans heal from PTSD, help them with grief, help them just manage mental health in general. There's yoga, there's art therapy, there's music therapy, there's sound baths, there's Thai. Yeah, exactly. We are finding that so much of what we care, how can it not be in our bodies, right? So we need that release, and it can be released through other ways other than just talking, other than just medication. And as I just want to say what Tina was saying, because I've been down to the VA a few times now, that there are some great programs that you don't have to be service connected to attend there. They have a whole health, what they call whole health.
Where we focus
That's
a lot
there.
on whole
That's
health, like
focusing
treating the
on
whole,
everything.
right.
Where they offer
Right.
Tai Chi.
Right.
They offer yoga. I'm going to be teaching a class down there once
Acupuncture,
a
it's
month.
another.
Yeah. And so all those different modalities. If you just don't want to talk, and maybe you need something to ease into that, and a toolkit is a combination of things: therapy, psychiatry, movement, nutrition, all those types
Where
of
are those
things.
classes being offered?
Down at the VA in Detroit, down there, they have a whole. It's beautiful. It really, really is. And like I said, I've just become part of their program, volunteering down there, and it's a really
Don't
a
forget,
good
we have our
thing.
gym too, right?
Yeah,
We have
and they
a
have the
big
gym. They have a beautiful gym. Yeah, they have a cafeteria. You can go in there and you can eat, and so it's great that they're moving in that direction and those services. No, not of course, no, they're not available to the whole family. But once you go there, they can give you other resources, that can connect you to things for families. So
Right.
yeah, so I just wanted to. That's kind of where my 2 cents
And
on
I
this.
just want to say what a privilege it has been to participate in this panel and be with all of you who do such valuable and needed and vital work. I benefited from being here.
Same.
Spiritually,
Oh,
emotionally.
yeah, absolutely.
Thank
From
you.
you, yes, we are. Yeah. So thank you, Joan.
So thank you all for joining us today to do our season of support. We've had some really, really great discussions, and we've had a really good opportunity to explore a lot of different resources, a lot of different tools and coping things. As a reminder, CNS Healthcare offers ongoing monthly support groups, both male, that's hosted by Chaka, and female, that is, I'm sorry, not Chaka, by Isaac. My fault.
Same.
She looked at
I did.
See the similarity?
Yeah.
Right, yes, you guys could be twins.
It's like twins. We're actually going to do the remake of that movie.
Okay, love that. So our male support group, hosted by Isaac, and sponsored by OCHN, put on by OCHN, sponsored by CNS, I guess is the right way
They
to say
meet
it.
here. Yep, we're the meeting site for them together.
And
Yeah.
then our female support group, that is
Women Veterans Strong, part of Women Veterans Strong. We meet the second Tuesday of every month, 5:30 to 7. We have a hybrid. You can come in person or you can be online. And this is our 6th year.
awesome.
Yeah, and so we're a female for female veterans.
I gotta do the plug with the logistics. So
Exactly.
the male support group meets third Tuesday of the month,
you go.
5:30 to 7 p.m. right here in this building. Every month, February through November. We take January and December off to reset, but we're coming up on our 4th iteration now.
Yeah.
And every veteran, regardless of discharge status, is welcome.
As well, yeah.
The reason that we separate males and females is just the dynamic, the willingness to share is different between the
Absolutely.
Absolutely.
two genders.
For sure.
Absolutely, yeah. No.
You're creating safe spaces for each
Right,
group.
Sure.
exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly. Yeah.
So, and then also, in addition, we are excited to announce a new group that is specifically for veterans' spouses. Not necessarily have to be caregivers, because there is a difference, right? Like, I'm not a caregiver for my husband, but I am a spouse. So, and there's not a lot of resources available for spouses. So I wanted to start with a spouses support group. That is actually starting January 28th, and that will be the last Tuesday of every month, also here in this building in Waterford at 5:30 to 7. So if, I really encourage people that are in that category to please sign up. And you can see the link for that through our Facebook page on CNS Healthcare on Facebook. These groups are designed to provide, continued support, foster a sense of community. Like Isaac and Laverne both talked a little bit about their groups and how they, it doesn't necessarily have to be, it's not a huge therapy group thing, right? They're all
It really is peer support.
They're peer support,
Yeah.
and even some education and some resources. So if you're eligible for one of these groups, please come and join us. We encourage anyone that fits into one of these categories to sign up and attend. My group is all in person, as well as Isaac's group is all in person. Laverne's group has a hybrid capability.
You can come in person or online.
So, and then one last thing, don't forget to enter our drawing for a chance to win a Meyer gift card or a copy of Nat Cole's beautiful book,
It's beautiful.
Lacey's Moon.
Are those are signed?
Yes.
Yeah, so signed.
So signed copies
Autograph.
of the book. So again, thanks everybody for being a part of today's event, and we look forward to connecting with you all in the future.
Thank you.
Thank you.